Hello, everyone, and welcome back to a very special episode of Rocket Lab Weekly, where we have the Emmy nominated 2 times bestseller author and the executive producer of Wild Wild Space with us, Sir Ashlee Vance.
Not quite yet, but I'll take it.
All right, all right. So, how has your last 2 weeks been?
It's been really good. It's exciting. I mean, I worked on the book obviously for many years, and then in the background was doing this movie, and I'd never done a movie before, and it was a struggle, to see this from start to finish. And so anyway, it's been very rewarding to actually have it get released, and then it's been interesting. I make a television show called Hello World, and it has like a YouTube audience. And then it's been really interesting these last couple of weeks that it feels like a whole different group of people have seen this movie, and you're just getting emails and notes from all over the place. So it was pretty cool.
That's awesome. I mean, congratulations. I really, really like the movie. I think it was really a unique behind the scenes look into how hard the startup life is actually.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I think I put a note on Twitter about this. I mean, obviously, look, it's like a space movie, and you get to learn about Astra and Rocket Lab and planets and some of the history. But uh, I watch a lot of documentaries. I don't watch them all, but I think it's rare to actually get to see startup life from the inside. And obviously people are kind of mixed on how they feel about Chris Kemp and his unbridled ambition and all of that. But I think kind of regardless of how you feel about him, I think he's not completely unusual as a Silicon Valley type of character, and that you don't usually get to see these machinations from the inside. And so, yeah, I really think in some ways, um, it's like a tech and startup movie as much as it's a space movie.
Definitely. I mean, sometimes these like it's kind of ingrained in the Silicon Valley VC system that a lot of the bets just don't work out. It's not even, yeah, because
It's
a lot of
No, it's totally true. And then, I mean, I think Chris gets some grief because everyone's like, oh, this guy's um whatever. I mean, promising is probably not the right word, but there's some scenes where he's talking to the investors after the launch and putting the best possible spin on things. And then you see him also, I think, kind of convincing himself sometimes about what the reality is. And again, I know he gets some grief on that, and there's people who are going to feel how they feel, but there is truth that e- even if you're whether it's a startup. Okay, so making this movie, this was essentially like my equivalent of a startup experience. I've always been a journalist who worked for a big media outlet. I've been sort of entrepreneurial in that I do my own books and things, but this was really like running a little business for a few years. And so I got a taste of how you have to the things you have to go through, how you have to convince yourself that something's possible when it seems impossible, just to get through the really difficult times. And yeah, so I think some of this was kind of Chris doing what lots of founders kind of have to do, which is like if when you started out on any of these projects, if you really internalized and rationalized what was going to happen next, you would never you would never start and do anything, because there's a chance it's going to fail, and it's probably going to be kind of miserable at times. So sometimes you have to have that suspension of disbelief, I think.
yeah, yeah. Okay, two questions. One of them you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but as this is like a business related channel, I'm very curious, what is the economics of making a movie? Like what, because
Oh,
I know
yeah.
time wise it's it's so similar to a rocket launch that you were working years and years and years, and then you have like one release and then it has to work, right? Like you can't remake the movie after.
Right.
But money wise, like what goes into this, and what do you expect as a return out of this? if you're
Well,
comfortable.
I am comfortable. Yeah, no, I'm happy to talk about it. I mean, I think documentaries in general is a pretty awful business. There's not many people, if anyone, who sort of like does this to really make money. You might win the lotto and have some once in a lifetime story, probably some true crime thing where you happen to be like, filming with the murderer or something like that, and everybody wants to buy the film. But the vast majority of the stuff you see from any of these studios is really a project somebody's just done because they felt like it was a story they wanted to tell. And so this one, what happened was I was a first-time filmmaker. I raised some money from three really kind individuals who are executive producers on the project: Rachel Crane, John Corey, and Mike and Baird. And they gave me the money to start and do a bunch of filming and prove the concept out. And there was a time when I thought it might be enough money to see the whole project through. I really, when I started out doing this, I wanted to make a series. So many episodes, probably 6 or 7 on in my head. When I started out, it was really like Rocket Lab would be an entire episode on its own. Firefly would be an episode. Planets, I wanted to do an episode on like the collapse of the Russian space program. I wanted to go to French Guiana and do the European space program. And so sort of taking people to these exotic places, covering these different companies, really this whole look at commercial space. And quite frankly, I bit off more than I could chew. Had some strange things happen with my original partner on the project, and so funds got a little light. There was a time when it looked like this would die. I pitched the series to a lot of studios. They all rejected it. I started kind of running out of money, and it was looking pretty bleak, and I was trying to finish the book at the same time. And then thankfully, Adam McKay, who made The Big Short and Talladega Nights and Succession and all these films, he and his partner Todd Schulman I'd pitched them years earlier, and they started to see all the rocket stuff happening in the news. And they said, whatever happened to that thing you were working on years ago? And I said, it's still there. And so they helped me sell it to HBO. And that gave us some more money to go do some more filming. And I partnered with the director, Ross Kaufman, who's won an Oscar, and Jay Callahan, this producer. Anyway, they helped me, finish it, do more filming and all that. But the economics are terrible. I mean, I literally made $0 on this. In fact, I made like negative money because I used to fund it, out of my pocket during some rough periods. And so it's just a really tricky business. I've learned now. I've just made a second documentary that's going to come out on Netflix in January. That was a much smoother process, and we did make some money on that, but nobody's really making millions of dollars on these things. It's really because you want to do it.
All right. So, well, thank you to your contribution to space history. It's so interesting because when I started talking about Rocket Lab, there was two groups of people. Like one was like in love with Rocket Lab, and the second group was like, why you even pay attention to this? SpaceX is just dominating everything. And so I think it really does a lot of service to the public to bring attention to that. Like, guys, space is very big. There's a lot of players, and it's not just the 800-pound South African gorilla who's in the room.
Yeah. I mean, it's a funny industry, right? I mean, when I started the book and the documentary, it was. I mean, the first time I met Peter Beck was 2015, but I didn't really know I was going to do all this stuff. I would say I kind of started in earnest on both these projects around 2017.
Just one question. 2015, when you met him, that was pre-Electron, right? Like he just got the funding.
Well, I saw Electron had not flown, but there were 3 Electron rocket bodies in the factory when I visited. It might have been 2015 when I can't remember. We did an episode of Hello World. I just can't remember if we filmed in 2015 or 2016. I know we started talking in 2015, but I'm pretty sure there were 3 Electron rocket bodies on the floor in 2015.
And in the movie, when he says, like, look at the wires, and at least it falls out of the sky. It's beautiful. Was that pre-first launch?
No. That one. very sure was because I can picture that factory in my head. No, that's later. This is like that's more when Rocket Lab was already up and going.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I forget the original question. Oh yeah, well, just the landscape. I mean, look, I mean, back in 2017, SpaceX was starting. I mean, they'd hit their stride, but not even on the trajectory that they were on. You know, there was this huge debate around satellites were changing. Planet had put up all these shoebox-sized satellites. You know, it really looked like we needed small rockets for sure, and that was really the heart of the race. Was kind of SpaceX long ago decided to kill the Falcon 1. They're not even interested in small rockets. Like, let's see who can emerge and win that part of the market, and that was the race. You know, so it was sort of like a different universe, and we kind of just saw companies being funded all over the world to go do that, and you know, Rocket Lab just clearly, as the years ticked by, I mean, they're the only ones who've really kind of done it out of that group. And so, yes, I mean, as you know, I think because from checking out my work, I mean, I just think Peter is just a one in a billion type figure. And I think because Rocket Lab's in New Zealand and because Peter is less self-promotional, I think by nature, and also because he's a Kiwi, they just haven't. I just don't think they've gotten the attention they deserve. You still hear everybody talk about the space race like it's Elon, Jeff Bezos, and Richard Branson, and Branson's companies are basically either have gone bankrupt or are going bankrupt. And Jeff obviously has had a lot of trouble flying much of anything. And so, yeah, to me, I mean, to me, this is just very obvious, kind of who's real and who's not.
Yeah, very, very interesting. So back to the beginnings of the movie, exactly what you mentioned. How did you end up on Astra, Rocket Lab, and Firefly? Because Peter Beck mentioned in interviews that Virgin Orbit was the preordained winner. And how did you? Because
Yeah,
you did manage to pick out the winner out of hundreds of companies, right?
I did. Yeah, I might say some controversial things next, but whatever. Here we go. I mean, we filmed with Rocket Lab, Astra, Firefly, Spin Launch, because I found Spin Launch to be very different and interesting. OneWeb and Planet. Those are the people we spent most of our time with. As a reporter, and also through my TV show Hello World, I filmed with Relativity and Virgin and interviewed tons of people along the way. So yeah, so I had to kind of sit back and map out, you know, how I thought the story might play out. You gotta like kind of forecast 5 years time. Where are you gonna spend all of your energy, and is it gonna be a good story at the end? And so, you know, I picked Planet because they had already really done a lot in the satellite industry, and it was imaging. It was just all very clear to me that that was a very strong story. Rocket Lab, like you said, that was 100% just kind of betting. I think this Peter Beck guy is going to do this. He's got a great story. It's going to be interesting, kind of no matter what. You know, when I started out with Astra, that was a fascinating gamble. I was always looking for something that was a little bit different, and so Astra was trying to build a rocket that was cheaper than anyone had ever done on a faster time scale than anybody had ever done. And so I kind of gambled that at least that one might go kind of quickly, and it would be something different at the end. That's sort of how I felt about Spin Launch too. It was a different approach. And Firefly, I liked Max as this very interesting character. And then, you know, when I surveyed Relativity, if I'm honest, in some ways they got much farther than I ever thought. I thought doing 3D printing and rockets at the same time was just way too much, and I thought they would be years and years and years behind. In the end, they ended up flying a rocket, but they've totally changed their strategy away from 3D printing, so I feel like I kind of got that one right. I like many of the people at Virgin. I just had very bad vibes when I went to that place, that they had been at it for as long as they had and did not seem to be making a ton of progress, and was not convinced that the leadership of the company was nearly as interesting as my other characters. And so that's kind of how I placed my bets, you know, and then my favorite stuff. all made it into the book. There's a huge, I'd spent a ton of time on OneWeb and Greg Weiler, and that never really appeared in the movie or the book, which did make me sad. The book is like, as you know, 500 something pages, and I just kind of felt like I couldn't do an entire other satellite story and get people to fully buy into that. And then Spin Launch is just a little, has a ways to go still. I don't know.
Wow,
That was a
so
rambling answer, but does that give you a feel? You just have to kind of place your bets, and it all really comes down to it's like a combination of the personalities and the technology, and you try to weigh those two things.
yeah. Wow, so you should do stock picking because you really picked out, Rocket Lab before they really really
That
took
one,
off.
I've been a journalist now for longer than I care to admit, almost like 25 years, and there's probably been about, I mean, I cover startups a lot, right? So you start to get a bit of a sense for these things, I like to think, and I could usually tell the ones that are absolute. Are we allowed to swear on here, or what is? Yeah, okay. I mean, I can usually tell like the 10 to 20% that are just utter bullshit, like in the first 5 minutes of talking to someone, and then there's kind of the middle ground, and then there's this super elite group, and it's only happened, I must have interviewed, I don't know, call it like 2000 something companies, and I think about 5 or 6 times have I been in the room, and you just know that this CEO, this founder is different, and this company's different, and that was pretty clear to me with Peter. I mean, I guess hindsight can make you look kind of good, I guess, but obviously, I mean, I committed a lot of time when nobody else was really paying attention to Rocket Lab very early on, so I'm comfy standing by this.
Yeah, and it's actually very interesting because I'm in contact with a lot of Rocket Lab investors, and I would say a lot of them has used your book as part of their due diligence, and a lot of people, that there is a very enthusiastic retail group behind Rocket Lab, and I think that that's also very special because it's only a few companies that have managed to really get retail support. Tesla was, I think, the pioneer. Palantir has a very big retail investor group, and these stories are so interesting because the retail investors, despite all odds, seem to be like ahead of Wall Street in finding something that is very special about the company. When all of Wall Street is either not paying attention or is doubting the story, and then in the end it turns into like a fairy tale for the very early investors. So hopefully Rocket Lab is going to be also one of these stories like Palantir and Tesla.
I mean, it'll be a journey, it's so funny because when I was covering these startups, it was like everybody wanted to be a rocket company, but it's like not at all clear that that's the part of the space business you want to be in. I mean, even, I'm not, it's possible. SpaceX is private, so we still don't know. I am like not wholly convinced that the actual rocket business is really a money, it might be profitable, but I think it's like barely profitable. And the value of that company is so tied up with Starlink and the possibility of what SpaceX can do. And Peter, like none of this stuff happens by accident. The company has evolved into this into what it should be, which is this multi-pronged space company, and yeah, none of that was by accident. I mean, I'm sure Peter was plotting all of this all along, and that's really what you have to do to make business, to make this a successful business. And if you're not doing that, I think you're kind of doomed. And commercial space has evolved so quickly where I just think if like you're just in the rocket business, I just don't even know exactly what the future of your company is.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like all the major players are pivoting away from being a rocket only company, and it's also crazy because it feels, I think when I last read it, there is still about like 200 rocket startups.
Yeah.
Maybe it's an older.
Yeah, these lists don't seem to get updated on the web that much. They're definitely, you know, and it's always like it's always been a little bit of a mystery. Like, how much of a rocket company are you? Is this like a bunch of dudes who go out on the weekend and you know are trying? But it is funny though, because I thought we had already been through the rocket startup boom, but we're kind of like we're sort of like in chapter 2 with like
Yeah, the
Stokes
international
and
also.
ABL and the Europeans and everybody coming. So you know, so this is all still very much playing out. But you know, they've got to look at, well, if you're making anything vaguely like Electron, I would just not do that. You know, you have to be doing kind of like a mid-sized or large rocket, I think.
Yeah, which is insanely hard, right? Because you kind of need the experience of the small rocket. I mean, all the successful companies seem to have gone the route of like small rocket and then medium launch. And then now SpaceX is like going into the super heavy.
Yeah.
But I'm like, how would you ever get funding with no experience, no proof of concept that you can fly a rocket and get to space? And yet, if you make a small rocket, you get killed by Electron, right? So
Yeah.
it's not. I wouldn't yeah, be a VC investor in that space anymore.
It's
It's
pretty rough. There were times I just couldn't even believe what was going on. I remember pretty far into doing the book, it was like Sequoia, which is a huge VC in Silicon Valley. They just they just didn't have a rocket startup, and so you know they went for Vector. And I just thought, I was just kind of like, why? I mean, Vector wasn't really doing anything different than anybody else, and they were late, and it just seemed like Sequoia wanted a rocket company, and that's what was left. I can't even understand it. Sometimes, I mean, I write about this in the book a lot. You know, space is this irrational business because it comes with all this aspiration and mythology and sexiness and excitement, and it's different to obviously investing in some SaaS software or something like that, and so people want to be part of it, and I think they don't always make rational decisions as a result.
yeah, I would tend to agree with that. Um, one question in the movie: how come it ended up becoming Astra and Rocket Lab and Planet, and Firefly, for example, didn't make it into the movie?
Yeah, I see lots of these questions on Reddit and elsewhere, for a bunch of reasons, I guess. Some of it was just logistical. You know, I live in Silicon Valley. Astra's about a 45-minute drive from my house, and so it was very easy to film with them and really follow the story. And so we had just a ton of footage. Obviously, I had my eye on Peter and Rocket Lab all the time, and just knew I wanted them to be in there. Firefly was tricky. You know, I think if I things it really goes back to what we were talking about before of the different stages of this project. Like, we had filmed with Max in Ukraine, we'd filmed some in Texas, a little bit in California. By the time Firefly was really getting closer to getting the rocket to the pad, I honestly had run out of money, and then COVID hit, and so we just had to start making decisions. I had to start making decisions on you know what was just essential to keep following, and that's kind of the part where I was paying out of my pocket to keep that going. So you have to pick and choose. I am a journalist. I am not a tech multimillionaire. So I had to make these choices, and that's really what it came down to. Once the project restarted, then Ross came in, and you know I had filmed 300 something hours, and Astra was probably on the order maybe of 50% of that, and Ross came in, and then it's sort of, it was not just my project anymore. We had this Oscar-winning director who had, it's really his job to make sure this turns into a movie that is up to HBO's standards, and so you know he starts looking for the story that he wants to tell, and obviously we talk about it all the time and collaborate, but you know he really started to hone in on the NASA Ames part of the story of Pete Worden and the Planet guys coming out of NASA Ames, and Chris Kemp coming out of NASA Ames, and then Peter and Rocket Lab were just so successful, so likable, such a good foil to all of that they had to be in there. And so it just didn't leave room for everybody else. If I'd done the series, been able to pull that off, we would 100% have a whole Firefly episode, and it would have been awesome. I think I think I am the only reporter ever to get a camera into like the old Soviet ICBM factories and rocket testing facilities in Ukraine. Lord knows if they even like exist anymore, because Dniepro's been bombed a bit. So anyway, no, I mean, it's really sad. I mean, that part is really sad to me. It was just a logistical, financial thing. I still have the footage. I'm talking to Max. He's upset that he's not in the movie, quite upset, in fact, and he's a fascinating human being. So who knows? You know, we'll see where all this goes. Max has been, you know, involved in the war against Russia, and so you know, might be a different movie, but I think we might be able to still use some of this footage.
Yeah, it's definitely. In your book, that was one of like, for me, that was one of the most emotional, like when we came to the end and the war started, and then it somehow like connected the dots, you know, that
Yeah.
the Firefly places were bombed and they were used for the snipers. And if I remember, it was some time ago when I read the book. And
I would not obviously wish for a war, but it was incredible that as I was getting to the end of my book, like the first space war begins, it was like everything I had been writing about was just coming true in this very dramatic fashion. So yes, yeah. It's my, I think the Firefly stuff, I don't know. I love all the different bits of the book, but that Max will always have this like really special place in my heart, because he's just a larger than life character on so many levels. Is like, you know, the best part of my job is you get to like not live somebody else's life, but you get a taste for somebody else's life, and you get to like inhabit their world for different periods of time. And Max's world might be my favorite that I've ever had a chance to dabble in.
In the book, I was like cracking up laughing when he called you in, and he's like, "Why do you write that I drink so much?" And he was like pouring a drink to you.
Yeah, I tried to make it clear in the book that I'm no angel either, you know, and this he was not like I was an active, willing participant in all this, but it was amusing that I would have some very strange conversations with Max.
All right. Do you think there is a chance for a sequel to this, where it's a lot more Rocket Lab, maybe like a Rocket Lab versus SpaceX, or
yeah, maybe. I mean, hopefully it's funny because like these streamers don't give you a ton of insight into what's going on. HBO says the viewership's been really strong. They haven't given me like sort of data on that. Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the hope, is that, you know, if this gets out of just kind of the space community and into the wider mainstream audience, and there's enough pull, I'm sure HBO will come knocking. And I do have all this other footage to build on. Everyone always asks me, like, you know, why don't you just do a book about Peter and Rocket Lab, or a movie just about them? And I've definitely thought about it and sort of tried. Peter does not make it. If Peter and I have a very good relationship, so I think I can say this. I mean, Peter doesn't make it easy, you know. I mean, he draws a lot of lines on what you can do. He doesn't really seek attention. He doesn't. It's like, I think he's like vaguely interested in the stuff, but not that interested, and so, you know, it makes it a lot harder. Like when I was doing the book, I remember the first magazine story I did on Peter, he put me in touch with like his brothers, and I don't think I think his dad was still alive then, but I don't think he put me in touch with his parents. And then just when I got around to doing the book, I was like, Peter, I have to interview all these people, you know, and he kept blocking me from talking to certain people. And it's like, Peter, are we doing this or are we not? You know? And you know, I know he really liked the Elon book. It's like my work, I think, kind of speaks for itself, and there's a lot of it out there. And I said, you know, like either you trust me to do this or you don't. If you don't, that's fine. Let's just not do it. But if you do, I have to like kind of do it right. And he just made it very hard. You know, I spent many months tracking all those early Rocket Lab employees down and doing all this stuff on my own to go find these stories. And you know, I went to Peter's house where he grew up, and um, you know, I put myself right there in these positions to like open these conversations up, but he was reluctant. So it makes it hard to, if I'm honest, to do that kind of thing. But I would be, it's kind of weird. I'm like burnt out on space, but I have such passion and love for this subject, and now I think I've kind of gone deeper on it than just about any journalist, especially in these art forms. So it'd be really sad not to see some of this stuff through. And I will hold on. I've got a lot more Peter Beck footage than appears in the movie, so we'll see where this goes. Yeah.
Okay. I think maybe we can also put a little pressure on him for you, because they do tend to listen to us retail investors,
Yeah.
even if it doesn't look like it sometimes. That they,
It's,
I was.
well,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. It's just, it's funny because I think Peter goes through, you know, it's like Elon gets so much attention because he's Elon and he says so much crazy stuff and is oftentimes the richest person in the world and all that. And, you know, I think it's frustrating to Peter a bit because it's like, it's hard to get attention when there's this giant sucking sound, you know, above you. And I know that frustrates Peter sometimes. And we've like vaguely talked about that or talked about it with the comms team and things like that. And, but, and then I think so every now and then Peter seems like he's willing, you know, to flip that switch, and then something happens and he never quite goes all the way. So, that's, to be honest, I mean, that's really these things, if you're a journalist, you know, it's like I'm going to do my thing and try to tell the story, and I'm going to be resourceful and find these voices. But if you really want to do something that's like intimate and on the level that I think sort of Peter deserves, yeah, it has to be a bit of a two-way street to make that possible.
Well, we will do whatever we can from our side to encourage them. Yeah. I don't know if you know, I had him on the channel. I was really surprised that they watch Rocket Lab weekly, and they like we're a very new community on
Yeah.
Rocket Lab. So I was, yeah, they do listen. I don't know if they will to this one, but we will do our part.
I did see that. Yeah. Well, I give Peter grief about this directly. So he's such a Kiwi, man. I was like, Peter, dude, okay, come on. All these years, the book came out, the movie came out. I mean, don't you kind of wish, you know, you'd trusted me a little bit more? We could have, you know, done some of these other things. And he just says, you know, it's a very good movie. You know?
Yeah, he's definitely a character.
He is, man. He's a good guy, though. I think Peter, there's the one big mystery to me is still if there's like some, you know, like Elon's so direct about I want to make this colony on Mars, and then if you try to find the equivalent mission for Peter, it's changing the economics and accessibility of space. And I'm just not always convinced that is, you know, I think Peter keeps so much stuff close to the vest. I always keep wondering what the ultimate goal of all this is for him, and I'm not that one keeps me intrigued because I feel like there's still a couple shoes to drop on where exactly Rocket Lab is heading.
Yeah, as he says, how does he say it? The best business in space has not been invented. Like, we don't know what it's. He says, I completely messed it up, but
yeah, that there's the ideas are still to come that are gonna build on all this stuff, which I think is right. And we're in a really interesting moment to see if some of those start to appear.
Yeah, cool. So as we are an investment channel, I have to ask you, what do you invest in? I asked my members, like, what do they most want to know from you? And they want to know, like, which space stocks do you own?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm going to have a really disappointing answer for people. So Bloomberg, where I work full time, first of all, Bloomberg has a really strict policy that we can't invest in anything that we write about or cover. And then as reporters, just I'm sure there are reporters that invest in what they write about, but if you work at the New York Times or the Journal or Bloomberg or anything like that, it's just deeply frowned upon to do anything like that. So I really can't invest in like tech stocks at all. To the extent that we can invest, it's usually something like a mutual fund where it's some blend of stocks, or something just far afield from tech, which is a bummer because tech is where all the action and the money is. So you're left like investing in chicken or something like that, so that's been, it's a little frustrating because I obviously spent 25 years studying all this stuff. And when I grew up, my dad is a really avid stock trader, and so I was trading stocks since I was like 8 years old. I mean, he would give me, I was allowed to put my allowance money into shares that I would buy from him, and then I would keep track of the prices, and then I would get dividends from my dad, and I could buy and sell. Like my dad was essentially like the bank, I guess, or the brokerage, just because I was buying such small amounts of shares and I was a kid, and I stuck with that. I paid for like the money that I ended up investing. Adobe was like this huge hit for me. I put money into Adobe when I was 18. That ended up paying for my wife's wedding ring and our first, a little bit of the down payment on our first house and everything. So anyways, a lot of this is painful to me. I'm into it, but I can't act that much. I think I'm not. I mean, Bloomberg even would sadly frown upon me giving stock advice. I still feel like the commercial space is a tough sector to be investing in.
Okay.
You've got to be brave and know what you're doing. I was like, when all these SPACs started happening, I was like, oh dear God, I pity the retail investors that are about to judge these companies on whether their first rocket blows up or not, because I don't think most of these people know, like, your first rocket, 99.9% of the time does blow up, and this is par for the course. And I could see stock prices going crazy on these things, and it was pretty funny. And then doing the book and the movie, God, I was just like privy to so much stuff that was going on. It made it quite clear to me that there's like not many people that actually understand the space business, and so I fear for the average retail investor here.
All right. We got the clue. We got the clue. Cool, Ashlee. I think that was all the questions that I have. Is there anything that you feel you want to say about the movie that people don't ask you in interviews? Or
not wholly, no. I mean, it's just been this awesome experience. I had like this is totally tangential, but it seems like the right audience. I'm kind of curious. Like in the middle of doing this thing, I was like, oh, I'm like one of the few people that's been to all these rocket launch sites. I kept wondering if there's like a tourism business in taking people to these sites, and getting them a visit to the mission control and the best spot to watch the launches, and just sort of like setting up little excursions. And then I don't even know if it's something I would pursue, but I feel like there is a business there for somebody who gets into this.
yeah,
Since you have an entrepreneurial audience, I think
yeah.
there's something there. Yeah.
Would you be willing to help someone like set up the excursions or get them?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the trick to it, is that to make it really effective, you would have to have like a decent relationship with all the launch providers, and sort of like not be a burden, but also still getting some kind of special access. And so, yeah, just finding the right balance of what that looks like. And then you have to deal with the scrubs. However, once you start getting to companies like SpaceX and Rocket Lab and the Europeans, you're starting to do pretty good, on the likelihood of the launch happening in a pretty defined window. So, yeah, if somebody really wanted to pick up on that, I would definitely have ideas. It's like it's a pretty cool thing, no matter where you go, whether you go to India, French Guiana, New Zealand, Alaska. I mean, it's like you're not just going to see the rocket, you're kind of going on this interesting exotic journey.
It feels like this is a space tourism idea that might work.
You're right.
You should call Virgin Galactic or Orbit, or I don't know which one is
Space
the one.
tourism on Earth.
Yeah. Cool. Well, it's been an honor to have you on the channel, and you're welcome back anytime if you have some updates that you want to share with the Rocket Lab investment community.
Oh, that's really kind. The honor is all mine. I love you guys' enthusiasm and appreciate so many people in this community seem to have really supported my work, which I appreciate, and I do hope it's helpful. And yeah, I'm not allowed to pick winners, but if you're in the Rocket Lab camp, I think you've probably made the best available choice. Because I think Peter is one of a kind, and I think the company's one of a kind, and that's sort of what it takes here to really make it. And I think it feels like SpaceX has won so much of this, but I firmly believe we are early days in where all of this is going, and there's much still to be determined.
Awesome. Well, looking forward to your future work, and thank you again for this interview. I put links to your books in the description box if anybody's interested in getting them. So see you guys in the next episode.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, bye-bye.